how they get less bright? No, I'm not going to sit. But I also would like to thank Harry Knowles, his father and his nephew who are here tonight, because there is no more understanding fan of what filmmakers are trying to do than Harry Knowles. None. Are you busy chomping on a burger or whatever? Sorcerer is now playing all over the world somewhere, and with many more screenings to come, and even a release, a real release. I don't go all over the world and talk to people in the theaters there. I went to Venice and I came here, and that's about it. I know I had a screening at Cinefamily in LA because they were responsible for telling me that the two studios who made the film claimed they no longer owned the rights. So I had to sue them to find out who in fact did own the rights. And we found out, and I was able to get it out of Cinematic Purgatory. And so this is a brand new, spotless print. It's the best print ever made of this picture. And I remixed the soundtrack so that it's fuller than it ever could have been, because originally, when we made the film, the track was released on optical track, as most of you know, and that didn't have a lot of range. And now it's all a digital track, so it's clean, and there are details in it that I didn't even remember putting in. We haven't changed anything. We haven't added anything to the track, or we just brought out details that were there, some of which were buried by the old process. But we haven't added or taken out a shot. This is the way I made the film in 1976. And that was after, about 4 years after The Exorcist. And I didn't know what I wanted to do next. I probably could have shot my nephew's bar mitzvah, and the studios would have made it. Because, the French Connection and The Exorcist, as you know, had enormous success. I was going to make a little low-budget film about the Devil's Triangle, off the coast of Bermuda, where all the planes were getting lost or reported lost for so many years. And I decided, after a conversation I had with Wally Green, who worked with me in documentaries many years before, and who had written The Wild Bunch, the Sam Peckinpah film. And you all know who Sam Peckinpah was, right? If you don't, get the hell out of here. But you can be honest, right? But so we talked about making a film that was about the mystery of fate, not faith. I had just finished a film about the mystery of faith, and I didn't want to do another film that dealt with that subject or the supernatural, and I didn't want to do another cop film. I thought I did about as good as I could with The French Connection and The Exorcist. And so we started to talk about the films that had impressed us a great deal. And the film that came up more than any other was The Treasure of the Sierra Madre. And this film is influenced more by The Treasure of the Sierra Madre than by the great H.G. Clouseau film, Wages of Fear. Although I decided to maintain the kind of spine of the Wages of Fear. 4 guys, strangers, enemies, who hate one another, but have to cooperate or blow up together. And that seemed to me like a metaphor for the world situation, then and now. And so we decided to do a film using the basic storyline, but with entirely different characters and incidents from the Georges Arnaud novel and the H.G. Clouseau film, The Wages of Fear. But the vibe, the texture of the film was going to be much more like The Treasure of the Sierra Madre. At that time, my strongest influences were The Treasure of the Sierra Madre as a film, and Miles Davis and Frank Sinatra and Gabriel Garcia Marquez, who wrote 100 Years of Solitude. And this film owes a great deal to the novel 100 Years of Solitude as well, which, as I'm sure most of you know, introduced the concept of magic realism. And from time to time, well, it didn't actually introduce the concept, it took it farther than any other novel had. I think the first magic realism book was by a Mexican author named Juan Rulfo, Pedro Páramo. I think that's the first known novel to use the style of magic realism. And I had that in mind throughout the making of this film. On the other hand, it was intended to be very realistic. I didn't want to do a film with superheroes. In fact, if anything, these guys are super villains. But I've always believed that there's good and bad in all of us, in every single one of us. And so Wally Green and I set out to test that theory by making the four leads in this picture not heroic men at all. Quite the opposite. Is there anything you wanted to ask me?
No. I figure we'll be back at the end of the movie for a Q&A.
Right after I have a Cuban sandwich, a glass of rich, hot, steaming, delicious, flavorful black coffee, I'll come back, and if any of you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer about this or any other of my films. It's really a pleasure to be here. I thank you, Tim, especially the audience. Wherever I've been, I think, Harry, do you remember the last time I was here? How long ago?
You spoke from the roof of the Paramount Theater for a show, but you weren't actually here because you were in Venice at the time. And then before that, I think it was...
Many years
I
ago.
think it was the Hunted?
Yeah, that's at least 10 years.
Yeah.
So you picked up a little more traffic than I remember. But it's such a great city. It's so wonderful to be here and with this audience. I've always kept the memory of when it was at a different theater, it was at the one downtown, but it was the same vibe. And I'm very happy to be here again.
That was the French Connection screen.
Was that Tarantino was in the audience,
Yeah.
I remember, and I brought him up. He needed a break, you know, because he hadn't been seen too much. And I've offered to debate him at the Alamo Drafthouse, at one of them, about, you know, about digital versus 35 millimeter.
I'm going to take you up on that.
Well, he hasn't yet. I've thrown the gauntlet down. But, you know, if that day ever comes up, it'll be at an Alamo Drafthouse. Thanks a lot. Well, thanks to you, and to you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming to see a 37-year-old film in this wonderful, wonderful theater.
Well, I'm going to start some things off. I got a few questions, and these are actually self-indulgent questions that I want to have answered. So I was very impressed. I don't know if just because you're shooting in the remotes, but your explosions and your fire seemed really spectacular. And so, who did you find to do that? Was somebody down in the jungle? Was that somebody you brought with you? How did you get spectacular explosions in this film?
There's a credit, if you noticed, among the end credits, and that's one of the things that struck me just watching the credits over there, that this is pretty much everybody who worked on the film. Today you see credits and there's about 1,000 names, because so much of it is visual effects, CGI, whatever. But this is, I would say, 98% of everybody who worked on this film. One of the credits says Technical Advisor Marvin Peck. Marvin Peck, I don't know, some of you must have heard about a company called Wild Well Control in Houston, Texas, run by Red Adair. And Marvin Peck was one of the guys who worked at Red Adair's company. And two other guys. I think they were the sole guys who were oil well firefighters. Boots Hansen and Coots Matthews. Boots and Coots and Red and Marvin. That was the team. And Red let me have Marvin come down, and he supervised all of the explosive effects that took place in the jungle. They're all real. They're not enhanced at all. We did all of that. Everything you see, we did. And it was very dangerous, and I would never do it again. There ain't going to be no two, I'll tell you that. But if there is, it'll be a guy in a spandex suit and a mask who takes the trucks to where they belong. But and then I had a special effects crew as well who had worked with me on The Exorcist, led by a man called Marcel Vercoutier. And we went to blow up the big tree, and they loaded it up with dynamite, and it was completely backloaded with solid sticks of dynamite. Should have been enough to take out this building and more, certainly that tree. And I gave the cue to roll it and the cue to explode it, and a few twigs came out of the back. Just a few, literally, little sticks and twigs too small for a panda to eat. And so I had a friend in New York who was an arsonist. And there used to be a newspaper columnist in New York called Jimmy Breslin. I don't know how many of you have heard of him. And he wrote a lot of columns about this guy who he called Marvin the Torch. Now, his real name was Bert Lipman. And in a room of, let's say, 1,000 people, he would be among the last 5 that you would ever think would be an arsonist. But he was. And he was in the beauty supply business in Queens, New York. And he used to use the beauty supplies that he carried around with him in suitcases to blow up, to make parking lots out of diners or other failing businesses. And so when my special effects guys couldn't blow the tree, I called up Bert, or Marvin, from the Dominican Republic. And he was, as I say, called Marvin the Torch, and his wife was known as Mrs. Torch. And I got on the phone, and it was Mrs. Torch who got on the phone. And I said, "Oh, hi, Mrs. Torch. This is Bill Friedkin. I'm in the Dominican Republic. I wonder if I could talk to Marvin, or Bert." And she said, "My Bert doesn't do that stuff anymore. My Bert's not." And I said, "No, this is for a movie, Mrs. Torch." And so I called him, and he came down, and he loaded up the tree, and he blew it up. This was, I think, the only motion picture experience of Marvin the Torch.
Aside from the gigantic tree blowing up, obviously one of my favorite scenes is the crossing of the bridge. Can you talk a little bit about that, about what you did to make that happen, and was anybody in danger when they're filming that particular scene?
Well, we had the trucks cross the bridge. That's how we did it. Everyone was in danger at all times. We dumped the truck about about 5 or 6 times. I went over with it. Once. I still think that my shoulders aren't square because of that. Could be because of something else, but I started noticing it about that. But yeah, we dumped that truck 5 or 6 times with people in it. And the actors drove it. Whenever you see the actors in the truck, they're driving it. If you see a long shot where you don't know who's driving it, it's a stuntman. But both the stuntmen and the actors went over. It was extremely dangerous. It was not anything I would ever contemplate again. There were a lot of things like that in my films when I was younger that I didn't pay much attention to. You know, I was telling somebody that we did an interview with today that I had like a kind of sleepwalker's self-assurance that everything would go right, that everything would go well, it would all come out right. It was well planned. It was planned in my mind's eye, and everyone that was doing it knew what they had to do, and it would all work out. And that included the chase scene in the French Connection, for which we had no controls, whatever. Just drove 90 miles for 26 blocks without any traffic control. And I would not do anything like that again. I don't believe that a squirrel getting a twisted ankle is worth the greatest shot you could make. But I didn't feel that way then. I really didn't. I mean, the hell with the squirrels, right? No, people. This was about people. And I didn't, I had no fear, and the guys who followed me had no fear. That was it. Today there's a lot of fear. There's a great deal of fear, and rightly so. None of the safety rules that are in wide usage, or should be in wide usage today, were ever paid attention to in those days. This was 1976 when we made this. And safety? Who cares about safety? Let's just get the shot, you know? And that was, everybody had that attitude, and there was nothing to fall back on. No opticals could do that. No, no computer-generated images existed. You had to do it. And part of why I did films like that was, frankly, I made films as both an adventure and an education. That's what led me to become a filmmaker. I wanted every film of mine to be both an adventure and something wherein I would learn a great deal about living in other cultures. Because I had never gone to college, barely got out of high school, and much of my education was in the way of the films I made and the places where I made them.
So what exactly did you learn by immersing yourself in this particular culture in the jungle? What are some lessons, some life lessons that you gleaned from this experience?
Shit happens. That's it. Forgive me, ladies, but that's the major lesson. I mean, the film, while not realizing concretely what it was about futility. And the whole thing was like a futile effort in and of itself. And it was about futility, about the fact that no matter how we strive or what we do or our necessity to survive, we have no control over our fate. We have nothing to say about how or to whom we're born, or where, or how or to whom we're going to die. And that doesn't mean that I'm either an atheist or an agnostic, quite the opposite. But yet I believe that we just had, and that was the strongest belief I had at the time, that we just had no control over our lives. It was all in the hands of fate. And whereas The Exorcist to me was about the mystery of faith, Sorcerer was about the mystery of fate. And what happens to the Scheider character, I have no idea. But I personally always felt, or hoped that he would live. But I have no idea.
We were just having this conversation just a few minutes ago, and I always just assumed he was dead meat. But you're right. I mean, it's your film, so I don't really.
No, I mean, it's not in any script, so I don't know. It lives on the screen, and it really. And one of the things I often or always try to do was put the meaning of a film or the lack of it or whatever into the laps of the audience. The films that I preferred were the ones where I was able to participate with the filmmakers in determining what happened. There are no easy answers in life. There are almost no answers to any of the big questions. None that I'm aware of. If anyone else is aware of the answers to the big questions, please. We'd all love it. But I always felt that this film, more than any I made, a lot of people find it depressing, and I find it quite the opposite. I find it exhilarating because it is an adventure, and it's something that is out of the control of the people involved. But the meaning or the ending or what happens, it all belongs in where it rightly should be, with the audience. I always felt with The Exorcist, for example, if you thought the world was a dark and evil place with the devil everywhere and no help, that's what you would take out of The Exorcist. If, on the other hand, you thought through faith and things we don't understand, it's possible for someone with an extreme illness, something that is incalculable, could be cured by faith alone. If you believe that, that's what you would come out of The Exorcist with. The end of The French Connection, it ends with a gunshot.
That's a spoiler, Billy. I just want to let you know that's technically a spoiler, but that's
okay,
cool.
but
if you haven't seen The French Connection, then goddamn you deserve a spoiler. So
but in any case, it ends with a gunshot. Who is being shot, who dies, whatever, I have no idea. I know that in the actual case, all the bad guys got away. And the guy who put this case together, the French Connection case, was a man called Jean Jahan. And he, we call him Chenier in the film. He got away from a 50-police dragnet in New York City. He got back home to Marseille and ultimately to Corsica, where he lived. And about less than a year later, the New York Narcotics Bureau, which no longer exists, sent a couple of detectives to France to extradite Jahan. And they were staying in a decrepit old hotel on the outskirts of Paris, and they had to fill out papers. They were bounced from one bureaucracy to another, and this went on for about 3 weeks. They were getting nowhere. They'd see this magistrate, that judge, this police official file page after page of documents, and finally one of the French police took pity on them and said, "You will never extradite Jean Jahan." And they said, "Why? Why not?" And he said, "Because Jahan fought side by side in the resistance with Charles de Gaulle. And so he was never going to be extradited no matter what he did." So, but in my film, Now, Jahan died peacefully in his sleep about 15 or 20 years ago.
Well, I have one more question. I'm going to open it up to the crowd here for some questions. So, you know, this movie is a challenging film. It's got an interesting narrative structure. You're sort of out of place for a little while, and it seems like something of a gamble for the studio system. Did you ever have any issues with the financiers? It was two studios that put this project together, telling you what to do, trying to guide or direct this process at all.
Oh, they had a lot to say, but I wasn't listening. I actually thought that I was bulletproof, you know, and that no matter what I did, it was going to work. And I wasn't, I mean, there were many times in the making of this film when saner people would have pulled the plug. But the studios went ahead, as did I, like sleepwalkers, you know, with the sleepwalkers' assurance. And sure, they were angry, I think that's one way to put it, and you know, they had no controls over the film at all. And that's something that I was able to establish very early in my career. Not the first couple of films, but thereafter, I knew what I wanted to do, and I just did it, and it worked, or it didn't, and that was it.
All right, well, does anybody in the crowd have some questions for Mr. Friedkin?
How are we going to see that?
Oh, I can see, I'm trained. I'm a cinema professional. Here, we got over there in the corner. Greenish shirt, yeah.
I've got a two-part question for you, sir.
I'm not sure if we're going to allow two-part questions. So, rules of engagement, one-part questions.
Okay.
All right, I'm okay.
First, hear the question.
All right, what if one of them sucks? If one of them sucks, one of them show it. All right, two-part question
The
here.
first question is about Sorcerer, which was that it was originally supposed to be Steve McQueen. I wonder if, in retrospect, you're glad you didn't get McQueen, because it's kind of tough to imagine it being this harsh with McQueen in it. The second part question is about your modern-day filmmaking. There was a rumor going around that you might reteam with Blatty to do Demeter. Is that something that you guys are still interested in, working towards?
I can answer those quickly.
Okay.
No, I've never even considered. His novel is called Demeter. It's one of his most recent novels. And I know there was stuff all over the internet that I was going to make a film of Demeter, but I never intended to and don't. The first part was, yes, we wrote this script, Wally Green and I. He wrote every word of it, but we worked on the structure together. We wrote the script for Steve McQueen. And when he read it, he said, "This is the best script I've ever read." He said, "But I have to ask you a couple of favors." He said, "You know, I just married Ally McGraw." And he said, "I know you want to go off in some jungle somewhere for 3 or 4 months." And he said, "So I want her to come with me, but not just as my wife. I'd like you to write in a part for her." And I said, "You just told me it's one of the best scripts you ever read." And I said, "There's only one woman in it, a French woman, in one of the early scenes. That's it."
She could have danced at the end.
He could have, yeah. But I said, "So I can't change the..." He said, "Okay, make her an associate producer." How's that? Make her an associate producer so she can work on the film and be with me in that capacity. And I was totally arrogant then. I was, you know, way out of control, and I didn't realize that a close-up of Steve McQueen is worth the most beautiful landscape you could find. And so I said, "No, Steve, I'm not going to make her an associate producer. That's a phony title. I don't believe in those titles, and I'm not going to do that." And he reluctantly passed. And at the same time, I had Marcello Mastroianni and Lino Ventura, who were going to take the other 2 parts, who were 2 gigantic stars from Europe, Italy and France. And when McQueen dropped out and it was Roy Scheider, they wouldn't take second and third billing to Roy. So, but to put a cap on your question, no, I'm not sorry. I think Roy's better than McQueen would have been. I think Roy had more acting chops than Steve. McQueen needed to do nothing on screen to be effective. All he ever did was look. And most of his best work is without dialogue, or with one word. You know, he could say so much eloquently with just the look. He was one of the great classic Hollywood actors who could do that. There were very few, like Spencer Tracy, Humphrey Bogart, Gary Cooper. These guys were not necessarily great actors, but they had a facility to speak volumes with just a look or a gesture. And McQueen had that. He's one of the last of those. But Roy was a great actor, a great film actor, and I think he gave up much more of himself to this role than Steve would have. But that's just a guess. I'm delighted with what Roy did.
Okay, another question. We got over there, the baseball.
How the hell can you see baseball cap? I can't see nothing. These could be the aliens.
You mentioned earlier enjoying filming in remote locations so that you could experience other cultures. And I've noticed that in your films that in certain scenes you'll see some gratuitous shots of everyday life that might start off just some everyday scene and then you zoom out and get to the action. Is that sort of put in there here and there just to kind of make it more real for us?
I have no idea what you're talking about. You have to be specific about what the gratuitous shots are.
Maybe that's not the best adjective.
I don't know where I've done that. You'd have to point it out to me. I don't know. Can you give me an example?
Like the boy plucking the chicken or...
Well, that's not gratuitous. I mean, no, I do try to set the scene, yes. The early scenes in that little village are what I discovered in the village. And so every one of those moments are moments that define that place for me. And there aren't a lot of them. You know, there aren't a lot of those moments. There's a scene that leads where Scheider's being taken to a police station. And the shot opens on a prison cell where 3 prisoners are lying asleep naked on the floor. And I open the shot with that and pull back, and then you see Scheider coming in with the 2 local cops. And that opening is to sort of suggest that this is where he could wind up. You know, tossed into a cell like that with no clothes. And sleeping on the floor with roosters and bugs and snakes and all that other good stuff. And so those shots that I think you're referring to are all meant not only to set a scene before you're in the scene, but they're kind of precursors, or they are meant to make you think about what could happen to these characters. So they all have a purpose. But yes, if you read any great novel, it's not just the plot. The greatest novels that I've read are not just about the plot. They're about the way people live and think and move about and, where they live and in what circumstances. And so the novels that have left the strongest impression on me are the ones where I'm firmly placed in the landscape.
You got a question right here.
Well, to kind of piggyback on that, the kind of scene structure and editing that you use, it doesn't exist anymore. And I'm curious if there's anyone out there that's contemporary that you look at and have any respect for at all.
Well, definitely the Coen brothers.
Sure.
You know, I think they're among the best filmmakers ever, which isn't to say that I love every film they've made. I don't. But I sure as hell love a lot of them. And they've made a lot. And I'd say Woody Allen. I have tremendous respect for him as a filmmaker. I've known him for more than 50 years. He's a lousy poker player, but he's one hell of a great filmmaker. In my opinion, among the greatest American filmmakers who ever lived. And so yeah, those guys, there was a time, ladies and gentlemen, that I couldn't wait for the next film to come out. You know, a new film by Fellini, or Antonioni, or John Ford, or whoever the hell it might have been. Some of the great classic directors from all countries. And I don't feel that anymore. I just don't. Which is not to say anything about the quality of the films today. It's more about me and how separated I am from the zeitgeist. I mean, I just don't give a damn about Iron Man 3 or Spider-Man, whatever it is, or the next. I don't care. They're not for me. They're pretty much for everybody else. And there was a time when I couldn't wait for the next film, whether it was large or small. Jesus, Lawrence of Arabia is going to open in a month. I can't wait. I better get my ticket now. You know, I don't have that anymore. Now I mostly see, what's that? Oh, sorry, Mom. I mostly watch the films I always loved on Blu-ray, unless they're playing in a theater somewhere. You know, like an Alamo, or there are one or two left in Los Angeles where I live, 3 or 4 in New York, a few other cities. But unless they're on a big screen, I'll watch them at home over and over again. I watch films like The Treasure of Sierra Madre constantly and learn from it. Citizen Kane, All About Eve, 2001, Paths of Glory, The Verdict, The Parallax View. I watch these films over and over again and get something from them, you know. And I've tried to watch a lot of the superhero films, but they just don't hold my eyes. They don't hold my mind. They're really not for me. But which is not to say they are. Maybe they're great. I mean, these films make much more money than any of the films that we ever thought were big money makers when I was very active. So, you know, millions of people see them and want them. And I wish I did. I really do. Because I love the experience of what you, ladies and gentlemen, are able to experience here and elsewhere. I love the experience. I just don't want to see the pictures anymore.
Oh, we got hands popping up everywhere. Where are we gonna go? Where are we gonna go? We'll go right here.
Whose idea was the shot of the beaten bride? Because for 2 characters, we don't know that one insert for that close up.
It was my idea, but that doesn't matter. It's hard to say, give you an answer to a question like that. Film is a collaborative medium. We call it, well, if you're a painter, all you need is a sketch pad or an empty canvas, some paints and a brush, and you paint whatever you want. If you're a writer, you either need an empty piece of paper and a pencil or a computer, and you work alone and you write something. If you're a filmmaker, you need a 50-ton pencil. You work with many, many people, all of whom contribute a great deal to the film. And whereas it will often say a film by so-and-so, a film by Joe Blow, or Joe Blow's production of this or that, there are people who don't even get their names on the screen who often have just as good ideas on my films as I do. So I never really answer that question directly. The final work that's on the screen is all my choice, you know? But a lot of ideas have come from the prop man, the actors themselves, the cameraman, the editor, whoever. It is a true collaboration.
So unfortunately, I got the word that we actually got to run out of time.
Why?
Partially because your wife is going to be mad at us, but also there's another crowd waiting to come into the
Right,
theater.
but there were
So
a couple of questions.
should we do two
Yeah.
reasonably
Intelligent.
reasonably intelligent? So this is where the veto rule is going to come in. If you think it's just really not a closer type of question, we're just
Oh,
going
this
to
is an
disregard it.
intelligent audience.
Yeah. So put your
Yeah,
hand
know
down
that, yeah.
if you have a question you're not 100% on.
If you have a dumb question, don't ask it.
That's the right one. This man seems to have a lot of confidence in his posture,
Okay.
so we'll go that way.
Hi, I was wondering if you could talk to us about Killer Joe. Tell us why you decided to make that movie and what it taught you about Texas.
Well, the writer, Tracy Letts, and I are on the same page in our worldview. He's a great writer. He's among the 3 or 4 best living playwrights. And I love his work. He's only written 5 plays in 20 years. And I've directed 3 of them, 2 on film and 1 in the theater. And I just love his work. Not all of it. His most celebrated work is something I didn't want to make as a film. August Osage County. I didn't have the same feeling about it that I had about Bug and Killer Joe. But I think he's an absolutely great contemporary writer and one for the ages. He's also a terrific actor. So, you know, I was attracted. The first thing that always attracts me is the story and the characters. A story and characters that I believe are possible. These people could be possible. You know, not Spider-Man or Batman or a guy like that. Catwoman. Although she's very attractive. Don't take that as a sexist remark.